Right, 1668, another war turn. Starts off with a remix event. After several events were drawn, people had an opportunity, but nobody played any. The only one I've considered, England had an assassination event. They might have wanted to play that against the sovereign, but the point with that is it's most useful in stopping a war that you're losing because the opponent has to sue for a white peace. That led me to think, gee, for the Grand Campaign, the remix events might be a nice way to kind of punctuate these end of scenario points or whatever. I don't know how to do that. In the simple scenarios, it's easy to say, yeah, we're going to have some end point. But it doesn't make sense in this when I'm importing, against the rules essentially, but the victory conditions from each given scenario. Without an endpoint, it kind of feels funny, but with it, I think it would feel equally strange. All right, lots more drawing. It's a good thing that there was a remix because there were too many events for me to keep track of sitting out there. I have trouble with like one or two per country, and when it ends up as a pile of them, 6 events or something in a country's hands, oh, what the hell do you do? I screwed up with the Edict of Nantes. That should have only happened in a peace turn. We haven't had one yet except the first turn of the game. The reason I noticed this was, well, we got the second event of that type, the American Revolution. I'm not going to allow that to go forward. The only thing that's kind of keeping the events from rolling out too quickly, because the whole cup gets eaten up pretty damn fast during wars, is the fact that they can only happen during peace turns. Nantes shouldn't have happened. That would have put a bigger delay on this. Otherwise, the way I'm looking at it is, geez, it would be pretty likely for the American Revolution to happen well before it should. I also noticed I didn't move Prussia back at the end of the turn. Did anything terribly interesting come out? Yeah, Prussia got this forced peace. That's kind of a neat event. They can force a status quo peace. I think somebody else had this before. They got... This one's going to force, and they may use this against Russia, them to either generate land grants or pensions. I'm not terribly sure I want to force Russia to do either of them. Chances are Russia is going to take the land grants very soon. They only have 2 leaders and they both suck. So helping them do that doesn't seem terribly valuable at this moment. But once they do it, then playing it and forcing them to do another one sounds pleasing. We also have a decrease in the prices. That's going to hurt our commercial phase pretty heavily. So that's where we're... Strange year for commerce with the lowered prices, but France, who has sort of a couple of high value locations, they actually scored 2 of them, a cotton and a slaves, did pretty well actually. Other countries, Sweden, well, they're going to have another crisis. They're not going to lose prestige unless, well, nobody's lower than them, as long as they spend a buck. Spain managed to make its barrier, so it's going to be able to try to get another shipping fleet in. They've got a couple openings there. That could cause problems, though, in turns like this, where it won't cover its own cost. But that's just, an issue that happens. You hope that the competition will drive some of the other people out so that you can fill their niche more accurately. But at the very least, these guys should make money most turns. Sometimes it'll be eaten up by taxes, though, and that's the problem. And of course, if they didn't have exclusive, other people would be competing with them, so then they couldn't really stay in their Holland ended up pretty poor. Holland spread out with a lot of merchant fleets, so that $1 per commodity really hurt them. You can't tell, but they didn't necessarily get their best earners in on this one. All right, let's see what we bought. Here we come to one of those vaguely remembered rules. I can't find it though. It should have affected actually the peace with Austria as well. I seem to remember I seem to remember Turkey has some ability to annex things that other countries don't. For example, miners and such. I can't find the goddamn thing. Basically, they have no claim to this. So is it safe for Russia to offer, say, a status quo peace, which is a little bit more expensive, or a compromise, than the white peace, thereby pulling Turkey's gains from the war away? And I can't find it. I know there's some kind of rule on it, but I can't find it. So I don't think it allows you to annex stuff that you don't have a claim to. Turkey has a claim to the Ukraine, but they don't have a chance of getting that. So basically the choice is spend some prestige to claim this territory, or as well as prestige to refuse what Russia's offering, which is a status quo. If Russia offered a compromise, their military situation is not as good, so Turkey would only lose the same as they do in a status quo request. Given that situation, Russia just doesn't think that they can win this war. They wanted to be in it when there were two powers. Nobody's willing to throw their weight in here. The only person who could count for anything is Poland, and they just, they certainly would get the agreement of Russia and Austria to enter the war. But right now, Poland's winning the game. And yes, Turkey's going to catch up. Poland may have problems in the future, but they would rather keep Turkey as the big enemy. In fact, Turkey's going to end up gaining lots of points at the end of the scenario, 15 points for Vienna. So they don't want to be the price paid to bring Turkey down, essentially. So, given that, and they couldn't take that away from Turkey anyhow. All they can do is maybe give some territories, gain Podolia, which they'd like. But I just am not of the will to continue with this war. I don't know. Poland's in pretty good shape at this point. Their weight would be pretty impressive. Let's see if Poland and Russia can come to some sort of agreement here. Nah, they're not terribly interested. So we're going to have a status quo peace. And a status quo peace only involves the exchange of territory. It's a status quo of the military situation, which means there's really no effect to the peace except there's no more war. So we'll go to the miners and the fun with that, which I don't want to do. I tried to convince myself to do it, but there was something else I can't find. There's a list somewhere of all the miners that have artillery, and I kind of wanted to look at that because I think Hanover is one of them, and I don't have an artillery piece assigned to Hanover. It's probably this one. That's probably the extent of it. Except that it's only part of Hanover. That's the King's Legion, which I guess is only Hanover under the English or something. God knows. But yeah. All right, I'll keep going. I couldn't find it. I know there's a chart or a list of them. I couldn't find it either in the, certainly not here, which is mainly war stuff and all in French. Couldn't find it in the rules and couldn't find it in the appendices where some things didn't make it into the rules, especially charts and tables. But all right, we'll try to do this. God, I hate this part. I had no problem with the commerce. That's kind of fit in. But, I had to look. Still, this sheet, okay, I stopped using that to track the minors. I've got them along here. But still, I got to look at every little tiny lettering on the counter. Hey, who has Hanover? Does anyone? It's just such a fucking pain in the ass. All that agonizing over the minors, and when it came down to the die rolls, only Holland spent anything on them. England has the money. I don't know. They just chose not to off of my die rolls. Holland protected Denmark and Portugal, and they actually spent all the remainder of their money. And they made it a bid on the Palatinate, which didn't get us anywhere. Which is going to put us into the economic or royal phase. To note about having gone to peace. Now, this huge Turkish, and well, the Russians isn't so big, feudal forces are in play. Now, if Poland had entered, they would have added theirs. And if you remember, Turkey's army wasn't very big. Poland probably could have handled it at that point. Well, that's what we thought about Russia when they hit in. But between the two of them, they probably could have. It's maybe iffy that Poland didn't enter in. There's a war weariness, though, that's affecting me at least. Forgot about France's money owed. They took it all out on credit. Now they have a public debt that exceeds Spain's $50. That means what? They're going to be spending $10 a turn on that. Their revenue is only 22. Unfortunately, I was building troops instead of paying my debt that I should have been able to make very easily. Austria is ignoring theirs. They're going to go bankrupt. It's cheaper that way. Turkey still gets the money for it. But I did notice something that I hadn't paid attention to. Losing Austria and Trieste, whatever is there, Istria, actually cost them, I think, 6 units. Their force pool has become tiny compared to what it used to be. The heart of the country's been ripped out of it. That's really bad news for them. Without war, the economic phase is not quite as painful. Maybe kind of like EU. And maybe even worse. This game will discourage me from wanting to ever fight, just because not so much the danger at it, although there is some, but the misery factor of playing out the rounds, but all in EU. But in this, it's more the economic side of it that's painful in the fighting. I did forget something, though. I had to make up for it. France and Spain have their pensions that, with the rules scattered all throughout the pages, and I mean, even if it was in a bound book, this would be royally painful. That's why I say somebody's got to write, for this to be an enjoyable game. If I was bringing this to the table with a group of players, I would be making player aids. Without some sort of player aids beyond what the game actually provides, the rules aren't accessible, essentially. But a good player aid card, in addition to what already exists, would probably go quite some way. You could probably make something kind of like the appendices. For EU, I have like 4 or 5 pages of notes. That's about what needs to be done here. A bunch of stuff that just doesn't stick in the head. Including, of course, a blown out sequence of play. That's probably the biggest thing that needs to be added here. The military phase is going to be trivial. I'm still going to take another break because I like taking breaks compared to playing this. The military... Austria is ignoring things. They're building an army. The military phase is going to be fairly trivial. Really what it comes down to is everybody's set except Russia and Turkey have to get their troops back into place, or else they're going to have to pay attrition chances for them. All right. The Turks moved their last few units back, and really this is all they have, plus something out there. They've got other things they can build, but most of what's in Hungary or whatever is going to be feudal core, which means some interesting things. They can dissolve very quickly. Someone could, because they're going to be spread out all over the place when they show up. Turkey's a large country. Of course, they could shift forces to the front before a war and then pay for them for supplies. All right. We resolved the victory points for this turn, but what I haven't done is taken care of this. Now, France failed at its. Spain is going to get 5 for having Artois, Flanders, or Franche-Comté, plus 10 more. So they're going to get 15 more victory points for their success. Holland and Sweden get 10 and 5 each for Flanders being okay. All right. Oops, Holland gets 5 more because they held on to New York. Turkey gets 15 for Austria. Austria does not control the Hungarian territories. Russia gets 5 for either Smolensk or just one of them, or Bryansk, and they got one, maybe both. They didn't get Bryansk, they got Smolensk. So Russia's going to get a 5-point bonus. Again, this isn't part of the rules. And then Poland gets 5 for getting Ukraine. That was really a good move, I think, to make that exchange. You know, that war could have gone on for a long time and cost somebody or both players something painful. Now we move into 69, and this is going to be a peace turn, so everything's going to change. We're going to be playing in the general peace, which, you know, it just has one military segment. That's really the only difference. Instead of having 2 sets of military segments, it has one, and I think movements tripled, and a bunch of years could go by. We don't make the normal life tests there. Just people who exceed their lifespan by a couple of years disappear. It's also possible it could be a very short turn. We got some definite problems coming forward, though, with some of the debt that's due. Austria, for example, is going to go bankrupt, and we know this. All right. Oh, and during general peace, the miners can drift away. They won't do that during the war phases. All right. So the problem with me doing these added victory conditions is that if you fall behind, bad things start to happen. So I'm looking at the second scenario as victory conditions. France is going to get 15 for controlling either Zealand or Holland, and an extra 5 points for having both. But they didn't resolve their other issue. Holland gets 5 as long as Flanders stays Spanish. Turkey gets 15 for controlling Austria. Well, I don't mind that they keep that. And of course, Austria still gets the bonus that they had. And Sweden is going to get a bonus for Pomerania, which we decided is going to be Prussian at this point, at the beginning of the game. So we're not seeing a lot of bonuses for other countries, so they may have less impetus to go to war. I don't want to think too far ahead, but obviously, you know, Russia is going to want the Crimea eventually. Poland's going to want to expand. into the territories that's historically theirs. Things like Spain and Holland want to maintain the status quo. England, well, they lost their opportunity to get New York for a bonus, but they still want New York because that produces an extra point of income if they have the whole of the American colonies. Now, there's a problem for England. I peeked at the American Revolution scenario by accident, essentially. Well, having anything but free trade gives you a penalty in terms of it makes it more likely for that event to come up. Anyway, moving forward, the next turn should, I hope, be fairly quick and easy. Beautiful new day and peace is in the air. Actually, it is kind of nice. It's always kind of nice here, but it looks like I've got another company that's come in, another construction company, but it looks like this one's in charge of putting wiring up. Maybe cables up in the air where you get those, I don't know, little cherry pickers or whatever, which is good. It means it's going to be quieter. There's not going to be a lot of truck noise and dumping huge tons of metal, and much more important, they're not going to spoil my view by building something big there, which would have sucked. It's been my terror of when that happens. So I looked at the general peace rules, and there's something that I missed when I went over the rules. I was very fatigued by the time I got to that point, I think. Victory points are multiplied by the number of years, not income, none of that. But your prestige that you gain from victory points is going to be cumulative over, however many years in the peace turn. Anyway, we'll get started with this, with random events, and kick off. We'll plod through it slowly. I'm not going to play this straight through. I get too frustrated. I'm in a chatty mood. I've only picked two of the events, and nothing's happened so far. In inflation for Austria, they're not going to build troops, and they had no cash, so they lost nothing here at all. You lose half your cash, and troops become more expensive. But then I started looking at this shit here, Pressions de la Cour. Now, with my limited visibility, pressions kind of look like passions, and my limited knowledge of French, cour I thought is heart, and maybe it is. Maybe what it actually means is pressures of the court, but I read it and thought it was passions of the heart, and I was so interested when I saw it. That didn't come out this turn, it came out earlier. But I'm thinking about that multiplier, and to me that doesn't make sense. It exemplifies the cost of losing a war, right? I lose a war, I'm going to be ditched down here and lose lots of points anyway. Now, at peace, I'm only going to gain 1 point for each turn. Okay, that's fine. So my bad position in the prestige table is going to stay there. Now, if I was only being fined once, and this is not an exciting period of the game, right? This isn't where the glory and the prestige is really gained. That would make sense. But if I'm multiplying it by the number of years in the turn, that means that I'm really going to suffer for being down there. Now, does that mean I have to fix things? I don't know. But there's something that really troubles me about that. I haven't decided if I'm going to play the way I first thought it was going to be, which makes more sense in a very abstracted sort of way, or if it was going to be... I mean, the thing that it's the other factors, like recovery. Some of the recovery does take place. You remove unrest markers equal... Oh, these all go away. You remove unrest... Actually, maybe not until the income phase. You remove unrest markers equal to the number of years, and all of these go away, and all kinds of other stuff happens, but the armies don't build up back up to their starting levels, basically. You get as much army production as you have on a warrior, even if you're not in the war. But that, you might say, well, higher tensions, etc. Yes, but if your army is destroyed like Austria's is, and you're able to recover your economy, which they will not, it would only make sense that someone would end up, that time would end up healing things. Now you could say, well, the die may indicate a period of relative peace. Yeah, but a destroyed army will be rebuilt to the level matching the other armies around it. They're not going to remain completely pacifist, probably. There have been elements of that, but the one thing that I wouldn't have changed, income, I could see being prorated over the years. I could see the commerce, although God knows, but you wouldn't want the commerce to stay fixed over 20 years if the income was prorated. But the last thing I'd want to see is the prestige be multiplied. It almost feels like this is one of those games where I'm torn between did the designer have this brilliant idea and really kind of worked it out in many cases, but left what look like glaring errors? Or is he brilliant and I'm stupid? Or actually, did he have a brilliant idea and then not really work to get it together? Kind of left it at a very abstracted level. It's hard to tell because, I love doing the mental gymnastics to explain something this abstracted, or 1830, for example. But I end up finding myself often maybe giving the designer too much credit in terms of making a game that's historically accurate. This could have just been a Martin Wallace-like decision, but it's not really based, I think, on play value. I'm not sure, because again, it gives the losing powers more impetus towards wanting to declare war. Of course, everyone else, and this is a problem, is probably going to have desires to pick on the losers. Hey, cheap points if you hit Austria. Last turn, you probably should have paid your 3 prestige to get a claim on Austria, right? That kind of play does not thrill me. But if you're playing this game to win it, that's what you would probably do, because you want to keep your points up there. Just like in Empires in Arms. France wants to constantly be at war. Historically, France did not generally generate those wars on their own. Prussia was a separate case. But, they would have been happy to maintain a peace, I contend. Although some would say Napoleon needed constant conquest. He needed to keep that prestige up there. So that's at least a debate. But here you do not have those kind of militaristic societies that the government requires the military to stay in power. Yeah, let's waste a lot of film on me babbling. I was hoping to get through maybe several turns here. I ended up with a remix, which canceled out all the events and cleared the board again. So we've got a couple of interesting ones out here. Actually, they're the same event in a couple of people's hands. Spain and Poland both have a frontier casus belli. Now they can play this just before they declare war, so that nobody's prepared with the alliances, or they can try to get their own alliance in place. I think Poland's probably going to invade Austria this turn. Austria's in trouble. Well, not this turn, but at the end of this turn, starting next year. So we're going to be going into a war phase right away. Spain, less interested in declaring war on anyone. They could declare war on France. We've got one other oh no, that one disappeared. We had an inheritance in Russia in the first set that I was thinking, Russia can't inherit anything. I think they may be the only country that doesn't have an inheritance event. Everyone's got basically one except them. Sweden, for example, can inherit Denmark and reform the old. I want to say Scandinavian League, but that's not it. It's geez, I can't remember the name now. The unity of the crown of Denmark and Sweden, which used to be in the Danish hands, but there was a chance that Sweden would end up inheriting the Danish crown at one point during this period. This is how England gets Hanover, for example. So Russia was considering putting this up for bid. The danger, of course, is maybe there's an event that allows you to steal an event from someone else. A lot of games have mechanisms like that. So if you advertise you have something, somebody's like, it's mine now. Anyway, on to the comment. Absolutely amazing commercial year for France. Remember, they've been doing well without winning all the things. Well, they won everything except the cotton here. They got the art, they got the cotton down there, everything. They pulled in some 20 bucks, and that allowed them to successfully build a navy. Remember, they have a minister, as well as put more money down than anyone else. Putting more money down than anyone else meant they went forward to prestige, and it hit England and Holland for a prestige for not having beaten someone they should have. Holland could have. They chose to invest as well, thinking, there are things that I could get into, and maybe I'll help put more pressure on the market. It was probably a bad idea. Primarily because Holland's victory points right now are not really in the lead. They're in the top portion, but they've got two people reasonably ahead of them, Turkey especially at 153, but Spain at 147, where they could pad their score a little bit and get themselves into a better position. This is their time. Of course, their time may never end, but if they keep a low enough profile, maybe England won't be able to overcome them. If, of course, they're spending on getting prestige, they're not spending on building up their infrastructure and competing with the English. But yeah, what the French did was pretty impressive. But in terms of the overall effect, yeah, it pumped their prestige up a couple of points. That means they'll be getting a couple more victory points for every turn until they hit, until they would have hit 15 in the end. So, something like 8 turns if it's at peace. Now, it doesn't go up that quickly, right? All right. I guess we're on to diplomacy, and I think we're going to end up seeing something ugly happen. Okay. Lots of complexity going on here. I'm not done with the diplomacy phase, but the easy parts of it. Next, we're going to have neutrals perhaps disassociating. And maybe neutrals, I haven't checked to see who gets in the war, but maybe neutrals who aren't in the war yet will pull out too. I'm not sure that I understood the rules correctly on that, and I'll have to look at that. Okay, so first thing is alliance discussions took place, and England was toying with the idea of an alliance, say, with France to punch through to Holland, but they need to fight Spain first, and England doesn't terribly want a war with Spain. They want New York. They get extra income from New York. They have a claim on the Netherlands to give them that. They're still playing with the idea, but they weren't convinced. Likewise, they tried to convince Prussia to go to war with Holland. Prussia has no interest over there, and sure, Holland's ahead of them in victory points, but there are other people Prussia's more worried about. Turkey, for example, Spain. Holland is not their top worry in the game. Maybe even Poland, who's a neighbor that they could do something about. One alliance came out, though. Poland, approached Russia. Now, Poland had a secret agenda here, which was, hey, I don't want Russia to declare war on me or to ally with Austria or something like that. I want to make sure, that I'm safe. Russia doesn't have a terrible interest in the Ukraine. They're kind of interested in getting this, but, these are national territories, so they are interested in them. But the overall threat of Turkey, Poland and Russia are the big boys. Maybe they'll be able to do something. Well, Poland ends up declaring war on Austria. They don't call Russia, but Russia says, hey, I want in this anyway. I think there are points to be gotten from it. So, poor Austria, right? And no one can do anything about it because no one wanted to ally with Austria. I mean, this is the problem. Austria doesn't provide anything. The only thing that an alliance with Austria would do is to maybe help against a Turkish war. Well, who would want to get involved in that? Poland and Russia. So now we're going to see the cripples getting shot. And I think it's much more likely in this game than in something like Empires in Arms, where, an Austria that gets defeated by France, well, you don't really want to destroy it from all sides, because that Austria having good manpower and money is important to, like, the ability to stop France further on. But there's always the problem of, hey, Russia decides it is the stalwart against France and it will take territory from its defeated neighbors and then finally force France into a war that they... Anyway, that's a different situation. In this case, you don't have any real, national threat to the world as a whole, except maybe Turkey. Anyway. Before the declarations of war, we came to the miners purchasing, and here, because we're in a non-war phase, miners are likely to disassociate with things. So, by the way, the Polish got their chit off. They had to roll for that. They only needed a 2 or higher, and nobody had anything to counter. Well, maybe somebody does. Turkey could stop it. But Turkey's got little problem with the idea of Austria being further weakened. Austria is the person with the most claim on their territory, and Turkey's happy with what's going on. So they're happy with a bad war for Austria. Poor Austria. So to the miners, nobody wanted to bid to try to steal them. That's a hard job because you have a penalty and you have to get to a high. You have a penalty in terms of if the other guy's got any bonuses, and you have to get to a higher number to get the thing. You might neutralize it, which is important if you're going to war with them. And did Austria have any? Austria has a couple small ones, Lorraine and Ansbach, but Poland has the biggies, Saxony and Bavaria, that are just going to add into this fun if they join in. So we had bids, England on Hanover and Prussia on Hanover, and Holland put a big $4 on the Palatinate. Nobody succeeded in getting anything. It's tough to get them. I mean, I kind of like the alliance system here. The bid says I've got the right to get an ally from this country, but you can't just buy a country like you can in some of the other designs. I find that a little unbelievable because, England always had a lot of money, yet they found only a few countries in the miners that, they didn't go about creating this network of miners throughout Germany to support them. They rather used proxies through the major powers. And without territorial concerns, what does England really have to offer to, say, the Palatinate or Baden? Can they go in there and say, hey, I'm your dude, man? Nah, they don't have an army, they don't have a threat, so nationally they don't have the position to really control some of those powers. And likewise, Sweden and Italy or something. Doesn't make a lot of sense. Yet, it could. And that's one of the problems with this kind of design is that, hey, what if Sweden does become a power in Italy? What if they take all of Naples? What then? Do they not? Should that not affect the political situation? Well, you'd have to have a much more complicated game to take care of that. And I still think this does a better job of representing the overall than most of the games. The fixed modifiers are still there. They're just not, overwhelmed by the possibility of throwing lots and lots of money into it. I think in EU you can get a +3 bonus, which is more than national bonuses generally tend to be. Just off money. Okay, so now we're, to a page that I lost here. Now we're looking at the minor country reactions and the possibility of territorial claims. Here's the thing. Does Poland want to spend some of their prestige right at this point? They got a free casus belli to maybe claim something terribly valuable like Silesia. Schlesien. That'll put them on a collision course from hell with Prussia. Their main goal here is just to boost their value and maybe capture some cash, make war pay. Spending a bunch of prestige points early in the war might not make a lot of sense. If we get our value up around the +10, where we're going to be dropping 2 spaces, if you're above 18, yeah, maybe it's worth starting to take some claims at that point. But I don't think I have a terrible land desire here. My big desire from Austria is I want the glory of crushing the already beaten Austrians. I don't know how much glory should be in that. Again, a more complicated design might take that into. The Allies stayed pretty much out of it. Saxony came in though, but the Austrians didn't get any help. They've got their Reich unit. We've got all the feudal armies being built up here, ready to go in. And, well, Ansbach will come in automatically once an invasion happens of the imperial territory, which is pretty much automatic. Austria, I think, is all imperial. I'm not positive of that. It looks like it. I think that's this gold border here. So yeah, all of Austria that currently exists is imperial. In fact, some of Austria that doesn't exist currently is imperial. Okay, so now we're on to the expenditure phase. And at this point, Prussia, Russia, and Austria have to try to build up for war. And Austria's got the problem, I think, this year. They have to pay off the rest of their loan, which means they're going to go into default. I think this goes down like 5, which will reset them, but they're going to pick up a lot of national debt. We'll see what happens there. It's just going to be ugly. They're not going to be a survivable country. And here's the problem. Once you have national debt that's at a ridiculous level, you never recover, as far as I can see, because you'll be paying all your income to service the loans and then going bankrupt and adding to your debt if you can't make it. And if you try to lower your loan, you'll be dropping this, which can add to your national debt by keeping you low enough that any bad year will send you down. So, it's sort of this never-ending spiral kind of. The other games, EU certainly can have that, especially with the declining powers that historically declined, that they can get into that position very easily. And empires in arms slightly, countries like Prussia can get wrecked for the game. You strip a couple of their valuable territories out and there's just nothing left. You could actually strip enough of Austria away that there's not much left either. So we've seen that. As I work my way through the economic phase, I'm realizing the ability, lack of penalty, whatever, to creating a large standing army during peacetime is somewhat disturbing to me. We've got England, I think, all but one of their units built. The Dutch have just built their last unit. There's no threat of war. However, you're only paying every 5 units or whatever. You have a slow ramp up with a country like England, and this is kind of ridiculous actually, because England had usually no standing army of any size. They relied on mercenaries that they would get from the continent in times of war, as well as large scale raising units for a military endeavor. And in fact, most of the countries followed that kind of policy. In a sense, the feudal design actually feels more accurate. You could say that that's reserve infrastructure, etc., in place. However, it costs you the same, other than where you have it located, in terms of the at-war condition. It feels a little strange. A country like England did not really prepare for war by, setting up some kind of landwehr type system or something. They kind of blundered into the wars and raised their armies as they needed. They always had a small army, but I really don't know what it's supposed to represent, that it's going to take them over the course of an actual real conflict many years to ramp their army up after they've, say, lost it, or compared to the beginning of the game or whatever. It just doesn't strike me correctly on that first of all, there's the feel of it, but then there's also, okay, if you say it's an abstraction and you step away from it from that standpoint, it feels like it takes too long to ramp up the army to its maximum size. The maximum size should just be small. I feel like EU does a much better job of this, where, hey, you get it for free. Money's really, really valuable, which it isn't in this game. You can see this is after they took depreciation, but honestly, you kind of want to spend your money because it just burns otherwise, which is one reason why you build troops, because there's not much else to do with it. You can throw money at other players. I'm not sure how much help that is. Nobody particularly wants to help Austria. They think it's a lost cause here. Giving them a ton of money isn't going to terribly help them, I don't think, although their revenue is kind of bad. But it doesn't really change the dynamic. In terms of the game, nobody's all that terribly interested in keeping Austria in place. They don't serve that interesting a position after they've been so heavily eliminated. If somebody really, really wanted to be their buddy, they could float them a lot of money. You could see, say, a Holland say, hey, here's $10, man, But that's not enough to save them in this war. It might be enough to make a good friendship, and the money's worthless, of course, to Holland. Got some naval building the Dutch built. The English have been trying, a lot of players have been trying, because, again, money is not something you want to hold on to. You don't want to save it. I kind of like that you don't want to save it, but there's nowhere else to invest it. Your companies are sort of this self-sufficient thing. You can't use your state treasury on that. So your state treasury has one purpose. Notably, that purpose, and to a very limited extent your income, it's not really connected too much to the debt. So France just spent $10 maintaining their debt. They have to. That left them less money to produce with, but they can't retire the debt based on the money that's available. Now, I find the EU very intuitive design to also be too simplistic, and it's kind of I can see where the thinking is, you give a government money and it's not going to retire its debt, it's going to do other things with it. That's the burning away. It's going to stockpile materials for a war or whatever if need be. I can kind of understand all that, but that counterintuitive side of it, even if there is something behind it, is gnawing at me. I don't know. This may actually be a better simulation of the way the governments work, though. That's what's kind of humorous, is this non-intuitive. That's the argument I was making with the. I don't know if the designer's got something brilliant here, that he really, really has a grasp on a way of simulating things better than the intuitive does, or if this is just pulling things out of his ass that kind of sound kind of neat. It seems really unlikely that it's the latter, but I've learned many games after looking at them too carefully. It does feel like, yeah, there was a thought there, but the thought wasn't fully explored as well as it should be. Playtesting very seldomly goes into how historical does the game feel. You might have people coming up with, no, that's not, that wasn't there. It's not in the OOB. What are you doing here? That kind of thing's easy to argue. Or you can say, yeah, that's not as powerful as you'd think it is. But when you start looking at simulations of economic systems in a war game, man, there's a lot of leeway there. Something like what I recently did, Hitler's War, over there, is a good example of something that was a cool idea, but got through the gaming process, but doesn't seem to really reflect on the reality that they're trying to say. Here's an example of the disorganization here. I had to find this. The first place I looked for, how you retire your debt as the general piece, because I remembered, hey, this is in the general piece rule. This is only applies if there's general piece. I had kind of made that error before. I see why now. So there's a series of special rules that only apply in general piece, but the retirement of the debt's not in there. It turns out that it's over here under the public debt rule, which is part of the regular income. That kind of makes sense, except that's a hard section. It's kind of stuck in a stupid place in the rules. It really is. But they talk about how the war debt, which nobody took a war loan out. War loans are kind of a deal because they don't necessarily convert to public debt, but you do pay interest on them during the war, which is painful. They talk about that, and then somewhere later on they talk about, well, you can retire the public debt. And I had found this before, but it's been a while since I've been able to use it because I haven't had a general peace turn in a while. And it's kind of a shame because almost everything is in the general peace rules. And again, you get some preconceptions, and there's always going to be a rule in the wrong place. That's an AWE rule. I mean, it really is. Universalis has the same kind of issue. And it's just a matter of you got to get really used to the rule book to go find that thing that you vaguely half remember. And it often requires, a 10, 20-minute read through. And the cost may be a little less here, but it feels just as painful. So, as promised, poor Austria went bankrupt, which gave them more political points, or prestige points, but they took on more debt, making them less and less effective a country. Right now they're at 35, which is painful given how small they actually are at this point in the game. However, France was at 50. Now, France was the only person who succeeded in reducing their national debt. They had a minister, so they had a 50-50 chance. Everyone else is pretty much at 1/3, and nobody got the successes who tried to. Nobody added to their navies successfully either. So, let's see where we get. Pulled leaders. It's another rule that's in kind of its weird place. It's in its own little section. But in a sense, it happens during your political phase. Your leaders show up. So it's tucked kind of away from everything that happens at the same time, which I think that's the real issue, is that too many things are hidden from where you'd want them based on what you're doing at that particular time, like pieces shuffled behind minors or something like that. I mean, it's just, the ordering is not by the sequence of play at all, which is disturbing. What the hell's this? Oh, some Swedish artillery up there. Okay, we drew leaders, like I said, the poles over here. And now we're on the magic die roll. How long was this turn? It was 4 years. Oh, what does that mean? That means it ends in 73. So the French get Luxembourg. I'll put him over there to hopefully remind me. And now I've got to look up to see if there are deaths at that point. Because we hit the life phase. We also have pacification, though. So what did I say? 4 years, which means Turkey gets to get rid of their 4 unrest. Of course, Russia can get rid of its 2. 4 being the key number there, the number of years. All the devastations are gone, and the countries are in pretty good shape at this point. Let's see if anybody died. We had a couple, the Austrian minister, and De Witt, who counts as the ruler, but he doesn't get a little crown here. Presumably he can't lead armies. He's really more a minister, but there is no military equivalent. We've got William in the Holland at this point. At some point or another, we should get William taking over England as well. I don't know what special rules there are. I think the 2 countries can still go to war and crap like that. I'm not sure. I'll have to look to see about that. We're moving now into 74. We just shoved that up. We pulled the points in, and nothing too shocking there. And now we have everyone moves 1 space towards 15. Unlike in the war turns where people at war don't move at all, perhaps, or very likely, and people who are above 18 move too. Yeah, the rules just change here for some reason. I don't know why. Let's be careful. That's where we are as we slowly move forward. Now, people who are trying to retire debt are not gaining. They're not gaining ground, even though they're at the low end of the scale, and that's kind of a pain in the ass. But next turn, no chance to retire debt because it's a 1-year war turn. All right. So here we go into 74, and there are more people dying in the near future. There are going to be some tests. I think there's some people who actually would have died, would have had to make a test. There's no tests whatsoever, no random tests. There's no possibility of random deaths without war. People will live. They can't get sick or anything. Whatever. All right, let's send this one